The more you listen, the more you know. This is Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.
All right. And we're back. Dr. Wilson's recording from his library. I'm in my living room. We're trying to stay away from each other. Anyways, so we're back up and running from remote locations, and we're really excited to be back.
We're toward the end of season 3, and we don't know where this is going to go long term. You're going to be an engineer soon, so how is that going to handle? Are we still going to be able to do this over the summer?
Absolutely. I would love to continue making this show. I mean, I think we're making really good content. I love the show.
We'll try to keep on keeping on then. Let's get into it today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the economy, stimulus, and politics, and we're going to take these one at a time. The first thing we're going to do is talk about the stimulus bill. Let's listen to our friend Larry Kudlow about this.
The total package here comes to roughly $6 trillion, $2 trillion direct assistance, roughly $4 trillion in Federal Reserve lending power. Again, it'll be the largest Main Street financial package in the history of the United States. Liquidity and cash for families, small business, individuals, unemployed, to keep this thing going. We're heading for a rough period, but it's only going to be weeks, we think. Weeks, months, not going to be years, that's for sure. And hopefully pave the way for continued economic recovery after this crisis departs. Thank you, sir.
The largest stimulus package in history. That's huge.
This has 3 components to it. You've got a fiscal component, and that's when the government deficit spends. You have a monetary component. That involves the Federal Reserve. And then you're going to have a private sector component, which I'm going to talk about in a second. You'll notice that this is a large bill, $2 trillion for stimulus, $4 trillion for the monetary.
What does that mean? $2 trillion for stimulus, $4 trillion for monetary.
The $2 trillion is going to be the amount of money that the government is involved in deficit spending. And that's the kind of stuff where there's going to be checks that come in the mail, there's going to be extra unemployment. Now, the thing to understand is that what each of these tools are. The fiscal thing, one of the arguments is that it's not as effective as the monetary tools. And one of the reasons why is I want to show you something. All right, so what we're going to do is put a couple pictures on the screen there for those watching us in the video. And what we're looking at here is a conceptual scheme. What you have is the United States government, and you have all these states. Now, here's what you have to understand, Adam. The United States government is allowed to deficit spend, but these states are not. They have to live within their budget. And so what that means is the U.S. government can get larger and deficit spend, but the states are going to have to contract because they're going to be under different pressures. They have to keep their budgets balanced. You can see that in Ohio. They're thinking about maybe having to cut their spending. They're thinking about maybe having to raise their taxes because they have to live within a budget. When the economy goes bad, people start signing up for unemployment. People start have lower tax money to pay. So there's less tax money going into the state of Ohio and an increased demand for services. Same way with the federal government. There's less money coming in and an increased demand for services. But the federal government can run a deficit. The states can't. So you have this strange dynamic where as the federal government deficit spends, the states contract. And in the aggregate, that makes the fiscal thing probably a little bit less effective than they would otherwise want it to be because it's offsetting what's otherwise happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The states are bound by the same budgetary constraints that we all are.
Let's talk a little bit about history, the politics of this. During the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover, he did not want to do any fiscal stimulus whatsoever. He was known for that. And he also, we were too early along in history. The Federal Reserve didn't do anything either. We were kind of too early for that. So there was no monetary relief. There was no fiscal relief. And the Great Depression basically happened because there was no intervention. You know, by the time FDR came around and did the New Deal and started this different way of handling a depression economy, you know, the depression had already been there for about 3 years. You know, the stock market crashed in 1929. Roosevelt was elected in 1932. So today, the one thing I notice is that nobody makes these old school arguments, these laissez-faire arguments. Everybody seems to be what I would call a new dealer. To hear that, let's play clip number 3.
Strain, you're at AEI, resident scholar. Anyone there making the case that we just need to let the invisible hand work here and there's too much government intervention? Have you heard that, or everybody's no atheist in the foxhole at this point?
I mean, I think people quibble with some of the specific things that that Congress has done. But the idea that we should not have a economic policy response to this is one I haven't heard.
Like you're saying, what if we do let the building burn down? I think that there might be some issues there. We could even have a housing market crash on top of everything because people wouldn't be able to pay their mortgages. And all those mortgage-backed securities would fold, just like in 2008.
What's interesting is that how we once had a point in time in American history where people thought that way. In the 1920s, that was the view. You keep your hands off it. It's interesting that today, nobody really has those views. Even the supply-siders, even the Reagan people, everybody is a New Dealer when Depression economics comes around. To hear that, let's hear Larry Kudlow.
Work together, move through this, succeed with the execution of this enormous rescue plan. By the way, it's about a third of GDP, $6.2 trillion all in. If we can do that, then we can look forward, hopefully, prayerfully, to some flattening of that curve that everybody talks about, and maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Is that Kudlow just being a cheerleader again?
The interesting thing about Kudlow is he's supposed to be this supply-sider, and here he is being a champion for a stimulus program that he says is 1/3 of the GDP, and he's out there saying, look, we got this big government program, and it's huge, and it's 1/3 of the GDP. What's the difference between that and, let's say Franklin Delano Roosevelt or somebody doing that kind of thing? There are differences, but it's interesting to see the supply-sider go that route. You notice that he's normally an optimist, but I notice his optimism is subdued, and he's really not very good in this role. He says, maybe the people will be pleasantly surprised. That's not usually what he wants to do. Usually he wants to sell, and we're going to have 3% growth, and this is going to be, and there'll be all kinds of opportunity. And here he's got to play a different role. He's got to be this pandemic New Dealer rather than a supply-side growth monger, and that's a different role for him. Arguably, he's not as good at it. There are a couple of differences between Democrats and Republicans when they have stimulus philosophy, but the differences are really small. For example, sometimes there's this debate about companies versus people. Democrats seem very often to remind us that we need to get checks to the people. These checks that go out, I think single people are supposed to be getting $1,200. Married people are getting $2,400. They've given an extra $600 in the unemployment compensation, along with the other amounts they're getting there. So there's a lot of money going out to people, but normally also there is money that goes out to corporations. There's small business loans that go out. They give them these loans where they don't have to pay them back if they can keep their payroll. So there's a government trying to help meet payroll obligations. And you also get sometimes bailout. They have to bail specific entities out. So it's interesting that it's not just people that get the money, it's also corporate entities. And to some extent, that's the new normal as well. Democrats and Republicans may have relative differences here as to how much they give to the people versus the corporations, but I think they're both on board that it takes two to tango. So to fix an economy, you've got to send money out to both the demand and the supply side, is what I'm hearing.
So I did want to ask you about that. What does the stimulus mix look like? How much is going into our pockets, consumer side, and how much is going to the supply side to avoid layoffs?
It's hard to get an exact number on that, and let me tell you why. If you're running a business, you have a capital budget and you have corporate debt. And so if you're getting an interest rate reduction, something that helps out on the corporate debt side of thing, you're also getting something, although it's not actually counted there as a dollar value. There also are these things that the Small Business Association is giving out loans, but you don't have to pay them back if you can keep your payroll. Basically, it's not a loan, it's just a gift. And so there is a lot of help going out on the corporate side of it that you don't get to see. When the feds buy all these assets, that helps corporations, right? They're getting help that way. So the question is how you count all these dollars. I think when you add it up, it's pretty equitable, the amount that's going out to corporations and the amount that's going out to individuals. We were talking about how Democrats and Republicans tend to differ on stimulus, and we said that after the New Deal, it doesn't seem to be all that much. One thing that is different, though, is this idea that part of what getting an economy going again is less to do with sending out checks to people, but getting large entities in capitalism coordinated. This is the way, by the way, Hoover wanted to fight the Great Depression. There wasn't a stimulus, there wasn't a monetary relief. He was just trying to be like captain of the capitalists and try to get the companies coordinated in a way that they would start working better, that the business people would solve the problem, not government. But it's interesting to hear this from Kudlow. Listen to what he says.
This president has used the private sector, the free enterprise private sector, in this crisis more than any other president has ever in prior crises. Now, you say, well, prior crises aren't comparable. Fair enough. But the point I'm making is this is a public-private partnership. I mean, my pal Peter Navarro, working with FEMA and DHS and so forth, you know, they've got all these big companies, whether it's masks, whether it's respirators and ventilators and so forth. I got a laundry list of things. I'll never remember them, but GM and GE and Ford and Walmart and Target and the biotech companies and the big pharma companies. No one's ever used the private sector as much as we have now. And that has enhanced our effort because private sector folks are smarter than we are as a rule, and they're certainly more innovative and creative.
There's his supply side shining through.
Here's a couple of things I would take from that. The one thing that probably is a little different from Democrats and Republicans in philosophy of stimulus is this third dimension. You know, you got fiscal, you got monetary, and you got public-private cooperation. You know, I think that some of these Republicans having more of a corporate background or business background, they believe that they can communicate better with large entities in capitalism rather than just telling them what to do by just regulating them. You know, in World War II and World War I, there was nationalization. The government actually took over the steel mills. You couldn't have steel mills producing toasters and appliances. We needed tanks. And so you had to actually have the government come in and nationalize industries. And I noticed that in this situation here, Trump is trying to play this role of being like Papa Bear capitalist or something. It seems a little bit. It seems a little bit Hoover-esque. The other thing to take from it is that
it also reminds me that Trump was taking to Twitter and telling different companies, you guys got to start making not respirators, ventilators. He took to Twitter, but he did not nationalize those companies and take over control of them. Yeah,
I mean, that's exactly right. And so he's trying to play this public persona, this public role, as though he's sort of Papa Bear capitalist. And that, he has this brand where he thinks of himself as a large entity operator in capitalism, trying to coordinate large entities and to try to get them to work better. That's what he thinks his skill is. Now, that is simply a political perception. It's probably also the perception he has of himself. The other perception coming from the other side is that, look, this guy's a huckster and he's a fake salesman, and that he's not going to be able to pull this off. He's just selling people on stuff, and that this shows that he can't really handle it very well. So there's this interesting political divide between whether this person is Papa Bear capitalist or whether he's this sort of huckster or fake salesman kind of thing. It's interesting because it sure is a lot different from where we were at the beginning of February. I hope you noticed before March started, even all of February, man alive, the Trump administration really had very interesting things going on. He could have a very strong economy. That fit well in his brand. You know, you could say, I'm the person who knows the most about the economy and the Democrats don't. Look at how well our record is. And all of that is gone now. He's got to now be this depression president. And I don't know that he's very well suited for that. You know, this is a guy who likes to have his name on the plane. And it strikes me that this has really thrown a wrench in what was going to happen in the presidential election. That the dynamic is totally shifted. This guy now has got to be a depression president.
Right. Instead of, I made the economy so great president. So where do you think that he is in terms of, is he going to try to put the fire out, or is he going to take a laissez-faire kind of approach? It looks like he's not there. It looks like he is implementing these stimulus packages.
The one thing I would say about Trump, and I think that this is very important, I've never taken the view that Trump is any kind of orthodox supply sider. The truth is, Trump likes to spend money. Trump likes debt. And if you'll notice, this guy seems to want to sign any recovery package that he possibly can, including something that's going to increase payments substantially to people. And he's not going to worry about running up the debt. And he's still going to maintain his posture as though he's better dealing at the corporations than the other people would be. So he's really trying to do both. He's trying to be Mr. New Dealer and Mr. Hoover. He's really trying to do everything, I would argue to you.
No, absolutely. That absolutely did. He does have this populist thing going on.
Right.
Has there been any press releases for bailouts for large companies?
Actually, I don't know on if there's been talk about whether Boeing might need a bailout, but I think that, and I don't think that's been the headline. Let's do this. Listen to this idea here, since this will go good.
There are people, Larry, who want to contribute so badly. Feels like the March of Dimes here when you and I knew that we had to lick polio. What's the matter with doing $1 trillion 30-year at 1.5 that we could all, a war bond. A COVID war bond, Larry. Do you know how quickly that would sell out? We feel so helpless, but we want to stop this. Everyone in America wants to stop it, and we want to find a way to do it. Let us.
You know, Jimmy, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a great idea. Obviously, I've talked to our colleagues about this, and whatever the maturity and the exact rate would be. This is a time, it seems to me, to sell bonds in order to raise money for the war effort. In this case, the pandemic effort. In this case, the effort to keep families and individuals and businesses afloat.
That's really interesting. Yeah, let's all chip in. It gives a nationalist feel to it. You know, we're all trying to do our part, and people with deeper pockets like Kramer would probably buy those things up.
The thing that you have to understand is that during World War II, when the country was going so far into debt that the debt was greater than the size of the economy, that we were actually running out of money. They didn't have these modern finance tools, but they were actually running out of money for the war effort. And one of the ways that they fixed that is they decided to sell a war bond. And what's a war bond? Well, you find people who want to buy that bond. And the bond will pay off in 10 years at a certain rate. Let's say even if it's only 1.5%. If you think this is an existential crisis, something that affects the whole country, the bedrock of the country, and it's like a war effort, then you float this. Then you float this bond. Now, who buys it? It might not be the people getting the stimulus checks, but it might be some other entities. It might be Kramer said he'd buy it. Kramer's not one of these small players. Kramer owns a couple of businesses. Right. You know, I mean, so what you're going to do is market. This is a marketing thing. You know, I mean, it's a good marketing tool. So you see very interesting things that touch upon history, what we did in World War II. And also this is like it's a business thing. There's a business logic. This guy Kramer says, hey, we could probably sell this bond. You know, give them 1.5 over 10, and that way we can get a lot of money. You know, they'll give the government money, help us finance this debt. So it's actually good politics. And whether it's good economics is really a separate question. It's just interesting because it touches upon what we did in history, and it touches upon sometimes how these business people think.
Politics without allegiance. You're listening to Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.
Dr. Wilson, did you know that all of our listeners can now listen to our podcast on any smart device?
That's right. You just say, hey, Alexa, play the podcast Good Politics.
Hey, Doc, thanks for bleeping that wake word out. And hey, guys, you could also tell Siri or Google on your Android or Google Nest device. So when you get home, try it out.